At Elite Motors in San Francisco, Mark Reynolds had an infallible rule: judge customers in seconds by their appearance. For 15 years, this strategy had guaranteed him the highest commissions at the dealership. Until, on an ordinary Tuesday, he dismissed a middle-aged man wearing simple jeans and a faded polo shirt, a mistake that would change his life forever. The morning in San Francisco began like any other at Elite Motors. The California sun reflected off the impeccable bodies of the luxury vehicles lined up at the dealership, creating a dazzling spectacle of metal and glass. The place was strategically positioned in one of the most upscale areas of the city, with views of the bay and close to the offices of the world's largest technology companies. Mark Reynolds adjusted his Italian tie while observing his reflection in the polished glass of a silver Lamborghini Aventador. At 34 years old, he was what you could call a success story in the competitive world of luxury car sales. His always gleaming shoes, perfectly fitted suit, and Rolex on his left wrist composed the image he meticulously cultivated, that of someone who belonged to the same social circle as his millionaire clients. Another day, another commission, he muttered to himself with a confident smile, running his fingers through his perfectly combed hair. For 5 consecutive years, Mark had been the salesman of the month at Elite Motors, a dealership that catered to the cream of Californian society, Silicon Valley stars, Hollywood celebrities who maintained residences on the coast, and professional athletes from local teams. The office walls displayed photos of Mark alongside famous CEOs and renowned actors, all smiling next to the vehicles he had just sold. "Reynolds, my office, now!" The voice of Richard Blackwell, the general manager, echoed through the showroom. Richard was a man of few words, but impressive numbers. A former legendary salesman who now ran the Waikiki dealership with a mix of calculated charisma and relentless pressure. Mark walked with confident steps to the glass office on the mezzanine. From up there, you could see the entire showroom, a perspective that Richard loved. To keep the sharks swimming, as he used to say. "Close the door," Richard ordered, without raising his eyes from the reports on his desk. "We're on the 18th day, and you're below target." Mark felt his stomach sink. "I'm only $1,000 below, Richard. I'll make up for it by the end of the week." "I don't want to hear that." Richard finally looked up, his eyes as cold as a poker player's. "Westwood Motors is breathing down our necks. They got the new McLaren model before us, and they're stealing our customers. The board is pressuring, and I'm pressuring you." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of expectation on his shoulders. "Understood. This month isn't about normal targets, Reynolds. We need a record. We have that Japanese businessman interested in the customized Bugatti, the rapper who wants 3 cars for his music video, and rumors that some Warriors players are looking to renew their fleet." The name of the basketball team made Mark smile. He had contacts at the Warriors and had already sold cars to some reserve players. The commissions from these deals had financed his apartment with a view of the park. Richard pushed a file toward Mark. "This is your new target, 30% above normal." Mark swallowed hard when he saw the O number. "That's ambitious?" "Yes. Impossible?" "Not for you. At least that's what you always say." Richard smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, and Jenkins is only 5,000 behind you this month. He's hungry." Jenkins? The name caused an involuntary contraction in Mark's jaw. The 26-year-old rookie had arrived just 6 months ago, but was already nipping at the heels of the veteran salesman. What irritated Mark most was Jenkins's approach, genuinely interested in customers, without the cynicism that Mark considered essential to survive in the business. "Jenkins still has a lot to learn," Mark replied with barely disguised disdain. Richard shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe you're becoming predictable, Reynolds. The trick is to never believe your own legend. When Mark went back down to the showroom, he found Jenkins animatedly chatting with a young woman who had just parked her Tesla at the entrance. From her smile, it was evident that Jenkins had already won her trust. Salesmen are like hunters, and customers like prey. Mark muttered to himself, repeating the mantra he had created. Identify the signs, recognize the value, and never waste time with those who can't pay. This system had worked perfectly for Mark for years. He could identify in seconds who the serious buyers were. The watch they wore, their shoes, the way they looked at the prices, everything told a story that Mark knew how to interpret. And above all, he knew whom to ignore. "Hey, Reynolds!" called Lisa from reception. "There's a customer who's been looking at the Porsche 911 for about 20 minutes. Jenkins is busy." Mark checked his Rolex. He still had 40 minutes before his scheduled lunch with a Silicon Valley executive who had shown interest in the Aston Martin last week. Enough time to assess the potential of this new customer. As he approached the Porsche, Mark saw a middle-aged African-American man wearing jeans, a simple polo shirt, and sneakers. No apparent watch, no designer accessories. Mark immediately cataloged him as a tourist, an internal term used for people who just wanted to see the cars up close without real intention to buy. "Can I inform you about any prices, sir?" asked Mark in a polite but distant tone, his tactic to drive away customers he considered unlikely to buy. "I'm still just looking, thank you," replied the man with a gentle smile. That smile. For an instant, Mark had the impression that he had seen him somewhere before, but he quickly dismissed the thought. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from his VIP client confirming lunch. "Feel free," Mark said hastily. "If you need anything, any of the other salespeople can help you." As he walked away toward his office to pick up some catalogs for lunch, Mark passed by Jenkins. "That guy at the Porsche," Mark commented casually. "Classic tourist. Don't waste your time." Jenkins frowned, looking in the direction of the man. "Are you sure? He seems familiar to me. Trust me, I've been in this game longer than you have. He won't buy even a miniature of the car, let alone the real thing." Mark laughed, patting Jenkins on the shoulder. "Let him take some photos to show his friends, and then he'll leave." Jenkins didn't seem convinced, but nodded and returned to his client. Mark headed to his office, satisfied with his ability to quickly assess people. The record commission he was seeking wouldn't come from middle-aged men wearing department store clothes. What Mark Reynolds didn't know, as he prepared the documents for his lunch with the Silicon Valley executive, was that his ability to judge people, a skill he was so proud of, was about to cost him much more than just a commission. Elite Motors was particularly busy that Tuesday afternoon. A technology convention had brought dozens of executives and investors to San Francisco, and many of them decided to celebrate their new contracts with equally new and gleaming acquisitions. Mark had just returned from his strategic lunch, satisfied with the executive's promise to stop by the dealership the next day to finalize the purchase of the Aston Martin. "How was lunch?" asked Sophia, the sales assistant who helped organize documents and bureaucratic procedures. "Closed," replied Mark with a confident smile. "Vinicius loved the customization options I showed him. Tomorrow, he's coming with the accountant to finalize." Mark noticed that the middle-aged man who had been looking at the Porsche was still at the dealership, now examining the Mercedes line while talking quietly with one of the technical assistants. That subtly irritated him. People who wasted the team's time when they clearly couldn't afford to buy were one of his biggest frustrations. "He's still here?" he muttered to Sophia, indicating the man with a discreet movement of his head. "He arrived almost 2 hours ago. Seems really interested in the AMG GT and the Porsche," she replied. Mark snorted. "Interested in dreaming, you mean?" At that moment, the main door of the dealership opened and an elegant couple entered, she wearing discreet but clearly expensive jewelry, and he in a suit that Mark immediately identified as custom Italian. The perfect type of customer. "I've got this," said Mark, adjusting his tie knot and moving quickly in the direction of the newcomers, intentionally turning his back on the supposed tourist. "Welcome to Elite Motors. I'm Mark Reynolds," he introduced himself with his warmest smile, extending his hand to the man. "Can I help you find something special today?" For the next 40 minutes, Mark dedicated himself exclusively to the Huntington couple, as he discovered their surname to be, showing them various models and discussing financing options. From time to time, from the corner of his eye, he noticed the middle-aged man still wandering around the showroom, occasionally asking questions to the technical assistant or Jenkins, who seemed to have finally freed himself from his previous client. The Huntingtons decided they needed a few days to think about it, but they seemed genuinely interested in the Maserati Quattroporte. Mark gave them his personal card and guaranteed a test drive for the end of the week. When the couple left, he checked his Rolex. It was already past 4 in the afternoon. Jenkins approached, holding a catalog of the new Bentley. "You won't believe who that guy is," he said, tilting his head in the direction of the middle-aged man. "Someone who's going to leave without buying anything?" replied Mark sarcastically. Jenkins frowned. "No, man. I knew I'd seen him somewhere. It's Dell Curry." Mark looked at the man, still unconvinced. "Dell who?" "Dell Curry, former NBA player, one of the best three-point shooters in history. Played mainly for the Charlotte Hornets." Jenkins seemed genuinely excited. "And more importantly, he's the father of—" "Look," Mark interrupted. "I don't care if he's a former player of whatever sport. The question is, does he have money to buy a car here? Because, from what I'm seeing, it doesn't look like it." Jenkins seemed disconcerted. "Mark, the Currys have considerable fortune. Dell had a long and successful career in the NBA and is now a sports commentator. And his son—" "Listen, rookie," Mark cut him off again, his voice low and firm. "Learn to differentiate celebrities from paying customers. There are a lot of famous people who are broke or who save every penny. Look how he's dressed. Faded polo shirt, simple jeans. He's here just to look at the cars and dream a little." "But Richard always says not to judge by appearances," argued Jenkins, visibly uncomfortable with Mark's attitude. "Richard says that because he's never been a real salesman," Mark replied, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "He manages numbers in spreadsheets. I deal with real people and know how to identify who will buy and who is just killing time." While they were talking, Dell Curry had approached a red Ferrari Roma, admiring the elegant lines of the vehicle. The technical assistant Kevin was at his side, enthusiastically explaining the engine specifications. "See?" whispered Mark to Jenkins. "He's making Kevin waste time now. I bet he'll ask to take a picture next to the car to post on social media." Jenkins seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "Mark, I think you should at least talk to him. I served some athletes before coming here, and many of them are quite discreet in public. They don't like to show off. And that's why you still haven't met your monthly target since you arrived," replied Mark with a condescending smile. "You waste time with people who won't buy." Lisa from reception passed by them, carrying some documents. "Mr. Curry just asked to see the Lamborghini Urus. I need someone to get it from the covered parking lot." Mark rolled his eyes. "See? Now he wants to see all the cars in the dealership. Next, he'll ask for a test. Drive, too. I can get the Urus, Jenkins quickly offered. No, Mark held Jenkins's arm. You have that couple of doctors arriving in 20 minutes to see the Bentley. I'll handle this. When Jenkins moved away, Mark approached Kevin, who was still talking with Dell about the Ferrari. Kevin, I need you to prepare some documents for the Huntingtons. They'll probably return on Friday, said Mark, strategically interrupting the conversation. Turning to Dell with a professional but cold smile, he added, Lisa informed me that you're interested in the Lamborghini Urus? Unfortunately, that model is reserved for a client who should arrive soon. Dell Curry smiled gently. No problem. Actually, I'm interested in several models. My son and I have different tastes, so I'm trying to find something that pleases us both. Your son? Mark asked, keeping his tone polite but skeptical. Yes, it's a gift to celebrate together, replied Dell. I see, said Mark, clearly not believing. Well, if you want to leave your contact at reception, we can notify you when we have new models available. The suggestion was clear. It was time to leave. Dell seemed to perceive the insinuation, but his demeanor remained calm and polite. Actually, Dell replied, I'm quite interested in the Porsche 911 Turbo S. Could you give me more information about the personalization options? Mark hesitated for a moment, looking at the dealership door as if expecting a real customer to enter at any moment. Sure, he finally said, but I should warn you that the basic model starts at about $200,000, and with personalizations can easily exceed $250,000. Dell nodded, unperturbed. Price is not an issue. I'm more interested in delivery options and extended warranties. Mark forced a smile, still convinced he was wasting time. However, part of his professional training prevented him from being completely discourteous. Why don't we take a more detailed look at the catalog in my office, he suggested, indicating a small glass room in the corner of the showroom. It was his standard tactic for customers he considered unlikely to buy. A more formal environment usually intimidated them enough to leave on their own. As they walked to the office, Mark cast a glance at Jenkins, who was observing the scene with evident disapproval. As they passed Sophia's desk, Mark made a subtle gesture, rubbing his thumb and index finger, his personal code, for waste of time. What Mark didn't know, as he opened the door to his impeccable office for Dell Curry, was that the man he had so readily judged by appearance wasn't just interested in buying a car. He was about to buy one of the most expensive in the dealership. And what made the situation even more ironic was the fact that, the next day, one of the biggest names in world basketball would accompany his father to Elite Motors to finalize the purchase. A name that even Mark Reynolds, with all his disdain for sports, would instantly recognize. Mark's office was a carefully designed sanctuary to impress. Recognition certificates for sales records adorned the walls, along with framed photographs of Mark, alongside famous businessmen and local celebrities. A shelf displayed perfect miniatures of the dealership's most exclusive models, and his glass and steel desk was impeccably organized. "Please, have a seat, Mr." Mark let the phrase hang in the air, realizing he hadn't asked the man's name. "Curry. Dell Curry," he replied calmly, settling into the chair in front of the desk. Mark nodded as if the name meant nothing to him, although he could now vaguely remember Jenkins mentioning something about basketball. He opened a luxurious leather folder and removed a premium catalog of the Porsche 911 Turbo S, the one reserved for serious clients. "This is our top-of-the-line model," began Mark, his voice assuming the professional tone he reserved for presentations. The 911 Turbo S comes with a 6-cylinder boxer engine, 640 horsepower, and goes from 0 to 100 in just 2.7 seconds. Dell leaned forward, genuinely interested. Impressive! And what about exclusive color options? I read about Porsche's personalization program. Ah, yes, the Porsche Exclusive Manufaktur, Mark replied, surprised that Dell knew the term. It's a service for selected clients. It allows you to customize practically everything, from the exterior color to the minutest details of the interior. He made a strategic pause before adding, "Of course, each personalization option has significant additional costs." "I understand," Dell said with a slight smile. "Money is not an issue." Mark raised an eyebrow, unable to hide his disbelief. He decided to test the supposed client. "Mr. Curry, I hope you don't take offense, but part of my job is to ensure that our clients find vehicles compatible with their financial profile." He interlaced his fingers on the desk, leaning slightly forward. "The car we're discussing, fully customized, can easily exceed $300,000. We have equally impressive options in the 100,000 range that might be more suitable." Dell maintained his serene expression. "I appreciate your concern, but as I mentioned, price is not an obstacle. I'm looking for the best to gift my son." "Your son must be very special," commented Mark with a tone that bordered on sarcasm. "What's the occasion? College graduation?" "Not exactly," replied Dell without elaborating. "Actually, I'd like to see the sports seat options. My son is tall, and comfort is important." Mark flipped through the catalog to the interiors section. "The adaptable sports seats are another $18,000, he highlighted, carefully observing Dell's reaction. "Perfect!" Dell pointed to a specific configuration. "And this carbon finish package?" "Another $22,000, Mark promptly responded. To his frustration, Dell remained unperturbed by the astronomical values. Mark decided to change tactics. "Mr. Curry, out of curiosity, what is your profession?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm a sports commentator currently," replied Dell. "But I worked in another field for many years before that." "Sports commentator," repeated Mark, not hiding the skepticism in his voice. "Interesting. Usually, our clients are technology executives, investors, or, well, current professional athletes." He emphasized the word current with a subtle tone of condescension. "I imagine so," Dell responded diplomatically. "They are extraordinary cars." Uncomfortable with Dell's lack of reaction to his insinuations, Mark decided to be more direct. "Let's talk about financing then," he proposed, opening another folder. "For a vehicle in this price range, we usually require an advance of at least 30%. That would be approximately $90,000. Up front," he observed Dell with a cold smile. "We have partnerships with various financial institutions that can help with a preliminary credit analysis today." Dell took a deep breath, finally showing a slight sign of irritation. "I don't need financing. It would be a cash purchase." Mark laughed discreetly, as if Dell had told a joke at a corporate party. "Cash? $300,000? He shook his head, incredulous. "Mr. Curry, may I ask how long it's been since you retired from the sport you played?" "Basketball," Dell corrected calmly. "I retired from the NBA in 2002 after 16 professional seasons." Mark nodded with fake understanding. 23 years is quite a long time. You know, we see many former athletes with financial difficulties. Wouldn't it be more prudent to consider something like a Mercedes C-Class? It's still an excellent luxury vehicle, but with a more realistic price. The silence that followed was heavy. Dell looked directly into Mark's eyes for a few seconds, his expression unreadable. Then, to the salesman's surprise, a small smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "I understand your concern," Dell finally said, closing the catalog. "Perhaps I am dreaming too big." Mark felt a wave of satisfaction, convinced that he had finally exposed the bluff. "Don't worry, Mr. Curry. It's perfectly normal to admire these vehicles. May I show you our line of pre-owned luxury vehicles? We have a 3-year-old BMW, 5 Series in excellent condition." "Actually," Dell rose calmly, "I think I'll think a bit more. Maybe I'll come back tomorrow with my son. He understands cars better than I do, and can help me make a more realistic decision, as you said." Of course," Mark replied, barely hiding his relief. He also stood up and extended his hand. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Curry. Let me give you my card, in case you have more questions." Dell accepted the card and put it in his pocket, maintaining his unwavering dignity. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Reynolds. Until tomorrow, perhaps." As soon as Dell left the office, Mark spotted Jenkins observing the scene from afar. He approached the younger colleague with a triumphant smile. "And that's how you avoid wasting 2 hours with someone who's never going to buy," he declared, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "Ex-athlete wanting to impress, probably living off past glories. Classic." Jenkins frowned. "Are you sure about that?" He seemed genuinely interested. "And the Currys—" "The Currys nothing," Mark interrupted. "Trust me, rookie. I recognize this type from a mile away. Tomorrow he won't be back, and if he does come back, it will be with some excuse about needing to think more. Meanwhile, I'm going to focus on Silicon Valley clients who can actually afford these cars." Kevin, who was passing by carrying some catalogs, briefly stopped. The guy seemed nice. He knew a lot about cars, too. "Anyone can memorize technical specifications from reading the internet," Mark replied, annoyed by his colleague's naivete. "But those who really buy know that what matters isn't the numbers, but the experience, the status." This guy had none of that. Richard Blackwell observed the scene from the mezzanine, his expression indecipherable. For a moment, Mark worried that the boss might reprimand him for dismissing a customer, but the manager simply turned around and returned to his office. "You'll see," Mark told his colleagues as he returned to his desk. "Tomorrow, he won't be back." Little did Mark know that Dell Curry was already on the phone in the parking lot, talking to his son, Steph, about the treatment he had received, and that, judging by the tone of the conversation, the Golden State Warriors star had decided to personally accompany his father on the next day's visit. "Don't worry, Dad," Steph was saying on the other end of the line. "Tomorrow we'll go together. I want to meet this salesman personally." Wednesday morning began especially busy at Elite Motors. A new Bentley Continental GT had just been delivered and occupied the place of honor in the center of the showroom, under strategically positioned lighting that enhanced its elegant curves and impeccable finish. Mark was in a good mood. His Silicon Valley client had confirmed the visit for that afternoon, and the sale of the Aston Martin would practically guarantee that he would surpass Jenkins in the monthly ranking. "News for you," announced Sophia, approaching Mark's desk with a premium coffee cup from the cafe next door. The Japanese Bugatti client moved his visit up to Friday. "Richard wants you to personally take care of him." Mark couldn't contain a smile. A Bugatti meant a commission that could pay 3 months of rent for his luxury apartment. "Excellent. Prepare the exclusive promotional material and make sure the VIP room is impeccable," he instructed, taking a sip of coffee. "And speaking of visits, I bet our Sports commentator from yesterday won't show up today." Sophia shrugged. Jenkins said he seemed quite serious about buying the Porsche. Mark rolled his eyes. Jenkins still has a lot to learn about who can really pay for these cars. That guy was just dreaming big. The morning advanced quickly between calls to potential clients and the preparation of documents for the Aston Martin sale. Around 11:30, Mark was reviewing the final contract when he noticed an unusual movement near the entrance of the dealership. Kevin and Lisa had practically run to the door, and other employees were beginning to gather, murmuring excitedly. "What's happening over there?" he asked Jenkins, who was passing by carrying some catalogs. Jenkins stopped, an enigmatic smile forming on his face. "I think your client from yesterday is back, Mark." Mark gave a short laugh. "Really? Probably with some story about how his financing wasn't approved. I'll let you handle him this time." "Actually," Jenkins replied calmly, "I think you'll want to assist him personally. He didn't come alone." Before Mark could respond, a buzz ran through the showroom. Customers who were examining vehicles suddenly stopped what they were doing, many pulling out their phones to take photos. Richard Blackwell quickly descended the mezzanine stairs, adjusting his tie and smiling in a way Mark rarely saw. Intrigued and slightly irritated by the commotion, Mark stood up to see what was happening. That's when he spotted them. Dell Curry, wearing jeans and a more elegant casual shirt than the day before, accompanied by a tall, slim man whom Mark instantly recognized. Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors star, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Mark felt his stomach sink like an elevator with broken cables. His mouth suddenly went dry, and he had to discreetly lean on the nearest desk for support. "Is that Steph Curry?" he muttered to himself, although he already knew the answer. "Yes, that's him," confirmed Jenkins, now standing beside him. "And that sports commentator you dismissed yesterday? That's Dell Curry, his father, a former NBA player and one of the best three-point shooters in history, as I tried to tell you." Mark watched in shock as Richard greeted the Currys effusively, as if they were old friends. Customers and employees approached to ask for autographs and selfies, which Steph granted with a patient and genuine smile. "Why don't you go over there?" suggested Jenkins with a tone that mixed amusement and provocation. "After all, Mr. Dell Curry is your client, isn't he?" Mark took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. This was a crucial moment for his career. He could try to fix the mistake, or hide and let another salesperson take over what now seemed to be a guaranteed high-value sale. His pride and his bank account were waging a silent battle within him. "Mark!" Richard's voice called him from near the entrance. "Come here and meet Mr. Steph Curry. His father mentioned that you assisted them yesterday." Richard's tone left no room for hesitation. With his heart racing, Mark adjusted his tie and walked to the group, forcing his best professional smile. "Mr. Curry, it's an honor to meet you," said Mark, extending his hand to Steph. "Welcome to Elite Motors." Steph Curry had a surprisingly modest presence for someone of his caliber. He shook Mark's hand firmly, his eyes assessing the salesman with quiet curiosity. "Thank you. My father told me about his visit yesterday," replied Steph. "He was quite interested in the Porsche 911 Turbo S." "Yes, of course," Mark hastened to agree, avoiding looking directly at Dell. "An excellent taste. It will be a pleasure to show you the customization options again." Dell, who until then had been observing the scene in silence, finally spoke. "Actually, Mr. Reynolds, I'd like you to explain to my son again those more realistic options you suggested yesterday. What was it again? A used Mercedes C-Class?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard shot a penetrating look at Mark, while some employees who were nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Steph Curry raised his eyebrows, waiting for an explanation. Certainly there was a misunderstanding, stammered Mark, feeling cold sweat beginning to form on his forehead. I just presented all the available options, as we do with all customers. Interesting, commented Steph, his calm tone contrasting with the tension of the moment. Because my father told me that you suggested he couldn't afford a Porsche and should consider something more suitable to his financial profile. Mark felt all eyes in the dealership turn to him. Customers, colleagues, and worst of all, Richard Blackwell, all waiting to see how he would get out of this situation. There was a mistake on my part, Mark finally admitted, humiliation burning his face. Sometimes we try to direct customers to vehicles that we believe better meet their needs. But clearly, I made an incorrect judgment in this case. Incorrect is an understatement, observed Dell calmly. You assumed I didn't have the financial means based solely on my appearance. Richard quickly intervened, his commercial instinct detecting an imminent crisis. Please accept my sincere apologies on behalf of Elite Motors. Mark is one of our most experienced salespeople, but obviously made an unforgivable error in judgment. Allow me to personally guide you through the showroom and ensure you receive the treatment you deserve. Steph placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Actually, we're here specifically to buy a car with Mark. The statement surprised everyone, especially Mark, who looked up, confused. That's right, confirmed Dell. We want Mr. Reynolds to assist us. After all, he started the process yesterday, didn't he? It would be a shame not to allow him to complete the sale. Dell's smile was gentle, but his eyes conveyed a clear message. This would be a lesson, not a punishment. Of course, agreed Steph. And besides the Porsche for my father, I might take a look at the other models myself. I'm thinking of renewing my collection this year. The words collection and renewing made Richard's eyes shine. Mark, on the other hand, was experiencing a surreal mixture of shame and opportunity. The same person he had belittled the day before could now represent the biggest sale of his career. It would be an honor to help you, he finally managed to say. Please follow me to the VIP area, where we can discuss all options with privacy and comfort. As he guided the Currys through the showroom, Mark couldn't help but notice the looks from Jenkins and other colleagues, a mixture of disbelief and a certain satisfaction at seeing him in that situation. What should have been a day of triumph had turned into a painful lesson about hasty judgments and deceptive appearances, and the lesson was just beginning. The VIP area of Elite Motors was located at the back of the showroom, strategically isolated from the main buzz of the dealership. With frosted glass walls, Italian furniture, and a small cellar of rare wines, it was a space reserved only for customers who were about to make 7-digit purchases. Mark had never imagined that he would lead Dell Curry there, much less accompanied by his superstar son. Please make yourselves comfortable, said Mark, gesturing to the leather sofas while his brain worked frantically to formulate a recovery plan. May I offer you an espresso? Or perhaps a 25-year Macallan? Coffee would be great, replied Dell with his characteristic calmness. Just water for me, added Steph, examining the environment with genuine interest. Mark pressed a discreet button on the wall panel, and in seconds, Sophia appeared. Sophia, please. An espresso for Mr. Dell Curry, and mineral water for Mr. Steph Curry, he requested, trying to maintain his composure. While Sophia went to provide the drinks, the three men remained in an awkward silence. Mark realized he needed to say something, anything, to relieve the tension. "Mr. Curry," he began, addressing Dell. "Which one?" interrupted Steph with a slight smile. "Mr. Dell Curry," clarified Mark, swallowing hard. "I would sincerely like to apologize for our meeting yesterday. I was completely inappropriate and made hasty judgments based purely on appearances." Dell studied the salesman for a moment. "You know, Mr. Reynolds, during my years in the NBA, I learned that a person's character is revealed not when everything is going well, but in how they react to their own mistakes." The door to the VIP room opened before Mark could respond. Richard Blackwell entered, followed by Jenkins, who carried a luxurious leather folder. Sophia came right behind with the drinks. "Mr. Curry, both Mr. Currys," Richard smiled, displaying his commercial charm to the maximum. "Forgive the intrusion, but I wanted to personally ensure that you are receiving adequate attention." Steph stood up to greet the general manager. Even in a room full of well-dressed people, the basketball star emanated an unmistakable presence. "Everything is going well, thank you." "Excellent, excellent," replied Richard, giving Mark a significant look before continuing. "I thought Jenkins might help us with the catalogs and custom configurations. He has been our specialist in high-performance European models." Mark understood the message instantly. He was being subtly removed from the deal. Jenkins, holding the leather folder as if it were a sacred object, couldn't completely hide his air of triumph. "Jenkins is indeed very competent," agreed Mark mechanically, feeling a mixture of humiliation and relief. Part of him desperately wanted to leave that room. Another part refused to give up the sale that could save his reputation. To his surprise, it was Dell who intervened. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwell, we really would like Mr. Reynolds to continue assisting us," said Dell firmly. "I believe in second chances. Everyone deserves one." Steph nodded in agreement, which seemed to seal the decision. Richard hesitated, clearly calculating the risks of leaving a VIP client in the hands of a salesperson who had already made a serious mistake. Of course, the manager finally conceded, "but Jenkins will be available for any necessary technical support. And I myself will be nearby to ensure that everything is perfect." "I'm sure Mr. Reynolds will take good care of us now," commented Steph, with a penetrating look at Mark. When Blackwell and Jenkins reluctantly left the room, the nature of the tension changed. Mark was no longer just embarrassed, he was indebted. And for a man accustomed to manipulating sales situations for his benefit, feeling genuinely indebted was a disconcerting experience. "Thank you for your trust," said Mark, sincerely. "I promise you won't regret it." "We'll see," replied Dell, sipping his espresso. "Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the Porsche 911 Turbo S with all the customization options." For the next hour, Mark conducted a meticulous presentation about the vehicle, answering detailed technical questions from both Currys. To his surprise, he realized that both father and son were extremely knowledgeable about luxury automobiles. Dell, in particular, asked insightful questions about performance and engineering that revealed a genuine enthusiast, not just someone impressed by status. Through the frosted glass walls, Mark could see the silhouettes of other employees passing by repeatedly, a clear indication that the news had spread. The elite of luxury car salespeople in San Francisco, who normally maintained a facade of professional courtesy among themselves, was now witnessing his fall in real time. "So, what do you think of the Burmester sound system?" asked Steph, bringing Mark's attention back to the room. "It's exceptional," replied Mark automatically. "But for a true aficionado, I would recommend the custom system, with additional amplifiers and specific configuration for the vehicle's acoustics." "Do you have a demanding ear?" asked Dell, seeming genuinely interested. The question caught Mark off guard. In his interactions with customers, he rarely talked about himself. Actually, yes, I studied music for a few years before entering the sales business. Interesting, commented Steph. From music to luxury cars. What an unusual path. Something in Steph's casual observation hit Mark deeply. When was the last time a customer had shown genuine interest in his personal journey? When was the last time he himself remembered the young music enthusiast he had been, before the world of high commissions and status transformed him into the calculating salesperson he now was? A light knock on the door interrupted the moment of introspection. It was Sophia. Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Blackwell asked me to remind you of Mr. Vinicius's arrival in 40 minutes, she said, addressing Mark. Mark had completely forgotten about the Silicon Valley executive and the Aston Martin. For a moment, he felt divided between two important sales, but then realized that his decision was already made. Please ask Jenkins to assist him, he replied, surprising himself with the ease of the decision. I am exclusively dedicated to the Messrs. Curry for the coincidental. Rest of the day? Sophia's expression revealed her shock. Mark Reynolds, the most competitive salesperson at Elite Motors, passing a guaranteed sale to his biggest rival? The news would spread through the showroom like wildfire. When Sophia left, Steph observed him with renewed interest. Did you just pass a commission to another salesperson because of us? The client deserves full attention, replied Mark, feeling strangely light after his decision. And I believe you do, too. Dell nodded with almost imperceptible approval. You know what else I admire in a basketball player, Mr. Reynolds? The ability to adjust when the game isn't going as planned. You're giving me a chance to change my game, acknowledged Mark, and I intend to take it. Then let's talk real business, said Steph, leaning forward. Besides the Porsche for my father, I'm considering updating my own collection, perhaps 3 or 4 vehicles. Mark felt his pulse quicken, not just at the prospect of the substantial commission, but for something else. The opportunity for professional redemption. As he began to discuss options for Steph's collection, he realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, he wasn't just selling cars, he was building a relationship. Outside the VIP room, Elite Motors employees watched with fascination the unlikely scene through the frosted glass walls. The arrogant Mark Reynolds, known for judging customers in seconds, was now totally dedicated to the same men he had disdained just a day before. A vivid reminder that, in the world of luxury and privilege, appearances often deceive, and sometimes the greatest lessons come in the most humiliating moments. The news of the Curry's presence at Elite Motors circulated quickly through the dealership, and even more quickly, spread the story of the arrogant salesman who had belittled Dell Curry the day before. While Mark dedicated the rest of the afternoon to attending father and son, meticulously selecting options for the Porsche 911 Turbo S and exploring possibilities for the renewal of Steph's private fleet, he felt his colleagues' stares piercing the frosted glass walls of the VIP room. Around 5 in the afternoon, after having finalized the configuration of the Porsche, which, with all the chosen customizations, exceeded $320,000, and preliminarily discussed the acquisition of a Ferrari, a Bentley, and an Aston Martin for Steph, the Currys decided to end the visit. They would return the following morning to sign the documents and finalize the specifications of the other vehicles. It was a pleasure doing business with you today, Mr. Reynolds, said Dell, extending his hand. His handshake was firm, and his eyes conveyed a silent message that the lesson had been transmitted. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Curry, replied Mark, feeling a confused mixture of humiliation and gratitude, and the dealerships as well. Steph, who had spent the last few minutes responding to messages on his phone, put away the device and also shook Mark's hand. Sometimes, the best vision is the second one, isn't it? The basketball star's perceptive observation hit Mark with precision. It wasn't just a casual reference to the second meeting between them, but a direct allusion to the salesman's hasty judgment. When the Currys said goodbye, accompanied to the door of the dealership by Richard Blackwell in person, Mark remained in the VIP room, trying to process the day's events. The biggest sale of his career was practically guaranteed, not just the Porsche for Dell, but potentially 3 additional vehicles for Steph. A commission that would change his financial year. But instead of the euphoria he would normally feel, Mark was experiencing a strange feeling of emptiness. Success had a bitter taste when it came after such a clear demonstration of his own prejudices and arrogance. The VIP room door opened abruptly, interrupting his reflections. Richard Blackwell entered, closing the door behind him. His face, normally calibrated to express exactly what he wanted others to see, now displayed an unusual combination of relief and contained fury. "My office, now!" ordered Richard, without beating around the bush. The general manager's office was located at the highest point of the mezzanine, providing a panoramic view of the entire showroom. As Mark climbed the stairs, he could feel the gazes following him, some of curiosity, others of veiled satisfaction at his disgrace. "Close the door," instructed Richard as soon as Mark entered, "and sit down." Mark obeyed, preparing himself for what would certainly be a severe reprimand, possibly even dismissal. Elite Motors had a reputation to uphold, and he had potentially compromised relations with VIP clients. "Do you know how many cars the Warriors have bought here in the last 5 years?" asked Richard, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't know for sure," replied Mark. 17, Richard informed, leaning forward. "And do you know how much that represents in commissions?" Mark swallowed hard. "Millions." "Precisely. Millions." Richard stood up and walked to the window overlooking the showroom below. "And you almost ruined that relationship in one day because you decided you could judge a man's worth by the shirt he was wearing." "Richard, I'm not finished." The manager raised a hand to silence him. "Do you know what Dell Curry told me while I was escorting them to the exit? That he was ready to buy a Bentley yesterday itself, until you treated him like an intruder who didn't belong here." Mark felt his face burn. Not only had he lost a significant sale the day before, but he had almost cost the dealership a valuable business relationship. "What intrigues me, Mark, is how someone as talented as you can be so stupidly arrogant." Richard sat down again. "Do you know why you're our best salesman? It's not because you recognize who has money and who doesn't. It's because people like how you make them feel important when you decide they deserve your attention." The words hit Mark like a physical punch. It was true. He had built his career making selected clients feel special, while dismissing others without the slightest effort. "The problem," continued Richard, "is that you forgot that every customer deserves to feel important, especially in a dealership like this." Mark suddenly remembered Mr. Tanaka, a modest-looking Japanese gentleman who had entered 6 months ago. Mark had treated him with similar disdain, only to discover later that he was one of Asia's largest collectors of classic cars. Jenkins had made the sale of 3 vehicles that day, and there was the middle-aged woman with worn sneakers and a simple purse, whom Mark had politely ignored, only to see her leave driving a Mercedes AMG sold by Kevin. Later, he discovered she was one of Google's original programmers, a millionaire many times over. "I'm giving you a choice, Mark," declared Richard, interrupting the painful sequence of memories. "You can take your things and leave today, with a generous letter of recommendation. Or you can stay and learn something." Mark looked up, surprised. "Stay?" "With some conditions," clarified Richard. "First, half of the Curry commission goes to a team training fund. Second, for the next 2 weeks, you'll work with Jenkins as your mentor." "Jenkins?" Mark almost choked on the word. "He's been here less than a year." And yet, he immediately recognized Dell Curry and understood the value of treating each person who walks through that door with dignity, replied Richard dryly. "You'll work with him, you'll learn from him, and at the end of the 2 weeks, I'll decide if you still have a place at Elite Motors." Mark felt a wave of humiliation even greater than before. Being placed under the tutelage of the rookie was a devastating blow to his ego. But the alternative, leaving the dealership where he had built his reputation, seemed equally unbearable. "Understood," he finally managed to respond. When he left Richard's office, Mark found Jenkins waiting in the hallway, clearly having been informed of the new dynamic between them. "Shall we get coffee?" suggested Jenkins, without a hint of triumph in his voice. Just a genuine offer of peace. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a cafe near the dealership, away from the curious glances of colleagues. "How did you know?" Mark finally asked, after a long silence. "How did you recognize Dell Curry immediately?" Jenkins gave a small smile. "I grew up watching basketball with my father. Dell Curry was one of his favorites, an incredible shooter who never sought the spotlight, just did his job with excellence." Mark shook his head, contemplating the coffee in front of him. "In all these years, I developed a system to identify serious buyers. I observed the watches, the shoes, the posture, the vocabulary. I elaborated a science about it." "And it works well," acknowledged Jenkins, "until it doesn't." "How do you approach it?" asked Mark, genuinely curious. "How do you decide who deserves your time?" Jenkins reflected for a moment, twirling the spoon in his cup. "I don't decide. Everyone deserves initial respect and basic attention. After that, I let the conversation show me if there's potential for business or not." "That seems inefficient," commented Mark. "Perhaps," agreed Jenkins, "but I've never lost a sale by underestimating someone. And sleeping at night, knowing I treated everyone with dignity, has its own value." The comment hung between them. Mark thought about how many sales he might have lost over the years due to his hasty judgments. How many Dell Currys had he dismissed before even getting to know them properly? "I have a lot to learn," he finally admitted, the words coming out as if extracted by force. Jenkins smiled. "We all do. The difference is being willing to admit it." As they returned to the dealership, Mark realized that the day's humiliation had served not just as punishment, but as a necessary awakening. The path to redemption would be long and uncomfortable. But for the first time in years, there was an opportunity for real growth, not just professionally, but as a human being. "Jenkins," he called when they reached the door of Elite Motors. "Thank you." The young salesman nodded in acknowledgement, and together they returned to the gleaming world of dreams on wheels, where Mark now saw something he had forgotten long ago. That behind each customer, regardless of appearance, there was a story that deserved to be heard. The next morning, Mark arrived at the dealership 1 hour before the usual time. The parking lot was virtually empty, with only the cars of some cleaning and maintenance staff. The San Francisco morning sun created golden reflections on the impeccable windows of Elite Motors, But Mark barely noticed the beauty of the moment. His mind was focused on a mission. Sitting in his office with the lights still off, he stared at his computer screen where he had spent much of the previous night researching. The page displayed impressive statistics. Dell Curry, 16 seasons in the NBA, more than 1,200 three-point baskets, one of the highest free throw percentages in league history. But the numbers were just the beginning. Mark had found dozens of articles about the ex-player's character, his philanthropic work, his role as a mentor to young athletes, his reputation for integrity in sports circles, and, of course, as the father of Steph and Seth Curry, both NBA stars following in his footsteps. In a recent video, a sports commentator had described Dell as the perfect example of how greatness doesn't need to come accompanied by arrogance. The irony didn't escape Mark. "You arrived early," observed Jenkins, appearing at the office door with 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Mark, who accepted with a nod of gratitude. "I have a lot to learn before the Currys arrive," replied Mark, indicating the computer screen. Jenkins approached to see what Mark was reading. "Interesting approach. Most salespeople research the client to know how much they can spend. You're researching to know them as people." Mark didn't respond immediately, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "You know what occurred to me last night? In 15 years selling luxury cars, I never worried about who my clients really were beyond their bank accounts." "Better late than never," commented Jenkins, without judgment in his voice. "The Currys should arrive at 10. Richard wants us to have everything prepared in the main delivery room, including a small reception." "Of course," agreed Mark. "Can you give me a few minutes? I want to finish this research." Jenkins nodded and left, leaving Mark alone again with his thoughts and the growing awareness of the size of his mistake. It wasn't just about losing a sale or embarrassing the dealership. It was about how he had allowed himself to become someone who measured people's worth by what they appeared to have, not by what they really were. At 9:30, the dealership was already in full activity. Sophia was coordinating a team arranging a table with gourmet breakfast and champagne in the delivery area. Dell's configured Porsche 911 Turbo S occupied the central place under special lighting, while discreet banners with the Golden State Warriors logo were strategically positioned. Richard was personally supervising every detail, determined to transform what could have been a disaster into a marketing opportunity. "Mark," called the manager when he spotted him. "A moment." Moving away from the bustle, Richard led Mark to a quieter corner. "How are you feeling today?" The question caught Mark by surprise. Richard rarely showed interest in his employees' emotional states. "Honestly, ashamed, but also determined," replied Mark after a brief hesitation. Richard studied him for a moment, as if reassessing the salesman. "Jenkins told me you arrived early to research the Currys." "Yes, I thought I should." "Good." Richard nodded with approval. "Listen, Mark, I also made similar mistakes early in my career. The difference is that mine didn't happen with national celebrities." The manager's unexpected sincerity made Mark look at him with renewed interest. "What matters is not never making mistakes," continued Richard. "It's what we do after them. Most salespeople who make a mistake like this would hide today, let someone else close the deal. You're here, doing your homework, preparing to face them." "Thank you," said Mark, genuinely touched by the understanding. "Don't thank me yet," warned Richard. "I'm still evaluating your future here. But today is a good start to show that the Mark Reynolds who built our reputation still exists under all that acquired arrogance." At 10 o'clock sharp, 3 black SUVs with tinted windows parked in front of the dealership. From the first emerged Dell and Steph Curry, accompanied by a man Mark recognized as Steph's agent. From the second and third emerged what appeared to be a small team of advisors and security. The entire dealership seemed to hold its breath. Richard advanced to receive them at the entrance, with Jenkins at his side. Mark purposely stayed a few steps behind, aware that his redemption would have to be earned, not presumed. "Mr. Curry, Mr. Curry, welcome back to Elite Motors." Richard greeted them effusively. "We have everything prepared to finalize the acquisition of the Porsche." As the small group moved through the showroom toward the delivery area, Mark noticed something he had completely neglected the day before: the way Dell and Steph interacted. There was an evident complicity between father and son, a mutual respect that transcended Steph's celebrity. It was Dell who generally spoke first, Steph who listened with genuine consideration. In the delivery area, after the initial greetings and a brief presentation about the vehicle, Richard discreetly indicated that Mark should take over the process. The crucial moment had arrived. "Mr. Dell Curry," began Mark, his voice lower and more sincere than usual. "Before we proceed with the paperwork, I would like to request a few minutes of your time. In private, if possible." Dell and Steph exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "All right," agreed Dell. Richard quickly arranged an adjacent meeting room, and soon Mark found himself sitting before the two Currys, without the protection of luxurious catalogs or technical specifications to hide behind. "First," began Mark, breathing deeply, "I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve you today, especially after my unacceptable behavior." Dell nodded, but remained silent, clearly expecting more than rehearsed platitudes. "I spent the night researching your career, Mr. Dell," continued Mark. 16 seasons in the NBA, more than 1,200 three-point baskets, one of the highest free throw percentages in history. "You did your homework," commented Steph, his expression neutral. "Not enough," admitted Mark, "because what really impressed me weren't the numbers, but what people say about your character, your work with young athletes, your integrity." Mark paused, gathering courage for the most difficult part. "I want to be absolutely honest with you. What happened on that first day wasn't just a misunderstanding or a momentary error in judgment. It was the result of years developing the habit of judging people based solely on appearances. I created a system to identify who deserved my time. And that system is fundamentally wrong." Mark felt his throat tighten, but continued. "I judged you not as people, but as potential commissions. And that is unforgivable." The silence that followed was profound. Dell Curry studied Mark with perceptive eyes, as if he could see beyond the words, to measure the sincerity behind them. "Do you know why I came in simple clothes that day?" Dell finally asked. Mark shook his head negatively. "It wasn't a test," clarified Dell. "I simply prefer comfort to ostentation. I've always been that way, even when I played. Some athletes would arrive with gold chains and flashy cars. I preferred to go unnoticed." "It's true," confirmed Steph with a slight smile. "My father always taught us that character is shown in how you treat people when no one is watching." Mark felt the weight of those words. "I failed that test, even without knowing I was being tested." "Every day is a test, Mr. Reynolds," said Dell softly. "The question is, what have you learned from this one?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, not just professional, but deeply personal. And for the first time in his career, Mark Reynolds was completely stripped of his salesman persona, facing not just important clients, but a defining moment of his own character. Mark looked at the two men in front of him, father and son, both examples of excellence in their respective generations, and felt the weight of Dell's question. What have you learned from this test? The words hung in the air, demanding not a rehearsed answer, but a genuine truth. I learned, began Mark, carefully choosing his words, that I built my career on a fundamentally flawed foundation. I convinced myself that success meant quickly identifying who had money and discarding the rest. But in the process, I lost something essential: the ability to see people as people. Dell nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. I also learned that humility is not weakness. Jenkins, whom I considered naive for treating everyone with the same initial respect, was right all along. Mark paused, feeling vulnerable in a completely new way. And honestly, I'm learning that true skill isn't in categorizing people in seconds, but in reserving judgment long enough to really get to know them. Steph, who had been listening attentively with crossed arms, slowly uncrossed them. You know, in basketball, we call this reading the game. Rookies want to impress immediately, so they force bad shots, make hasty passes. Veterans know that sometimes you need to observe how the defense moves, feel the rhythm of the game before making decisions. Exactly, agreed Mark, surprised by the precision of the analogy. I was playing too hastily, relying only on my first instinct. Dell looked at his son with evident pride before turning his attention back to Mark. Mr. Reynolds, we all make errors in judgment. The question was never whether you made a mistake. The question was always what you would do afterward. And so? Asked Steph. What are you going to do now? Mark took a deep breath. Now? I'm going back to basics, treating each person who enters that door with respect, regardless of appearance or what I presume about their purchasing power, and accepting that Jenkins has much to teach me, even being younger. A genuine smile appeared on Dell's face. Then I think we're ready to buy a car. The rest of the morning transpired in a whirlwind of activity. Documents were signed, photographs were taken, and Dell Curry received the keys to his new customized Porsche 911 Turbo S. Steph, after detailed discussions about specifications, ordered not just the 3 vehicles he had initially mentioned, but added a Lamborghini Urus for his wife, a total commission that surpassed any previous record at Elite Motors. What surprised Mark most, however, was how naturally the conversation flowed once all pretenses had been abandoned. He discovered that Dell was a jazz aficionado, sharing Mark's love for the music. Steph revealed stories about his first cars and how his father always advised him to be cautious with large acquisitions, despite his growing fortune. Behind the Aho's impressive statistics and fame were real people, with stories, values, and fascinating perspectives. When the Currys finally departed, Dell driving his new Porsche with a teenage smile and Steph promising to return in 2 weeks to follow up on the configuration of his vehicles, Mark felt strangely serene. The record sale he had just closed seemed almost secondary compared to the lesson he had received. Richard approached him as they watched the convoy cars moving away. Congratulations, Reynolds. Record sales, satisfied customers, potential for future business. The manager seemed genuinely impressed. How do you feel? Mark reflected for a moment. Different, as if I had just remembered why I entered this business in the first place. And why was that? Because I truly loved cars and people, not just commissions. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Keep that in mind in the coming weeks. I still want you to work with Jenkins. There are important lessons in that partnership for both of you. The following weeks brought subtle but profound changes to Mark's routine at Elite Motors. Working alongside Jenkins, something he would have considered humiliating just days before, He began to observe how the young salesman approached each customer, regardless of appearance, with the same enthusiasm and genuine respect. Jenkins, in turn, eagerly absorbed the refined techniques and technical knowledge that Mark had accumulated over years. On a particularly quiet afternoon, 3 weeks after the episode with the Currys, an elderly woman entered the dealership. She wore simple clothes, carried a worn purse, and walked with the help of a cane. The old Mark would have politely directed her to another salesperson. The new Mark approached her with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The woman looked at him with lively, penetrating eyes. "I'm looking for a gift for my grandson. He just graduated from medical school." Mark spent the next hour showing various models, patiently explaining technical specifications, never rushing or judging. The woman, as he discovered, was Dr. Eleanor Hamilton, a renowned retired neurosurgeon who wanted to gift her grandson a BMW M4. When she left, after closing the purchase, Jenkins approached with an approving smile. "The old Mark would have lost that sale," he commented. "The old Mark was losing much more than sales," replied Mark thoughtfully. On the following Wednesday, Mark was reviewing some contracts when Sophia appeared at his door. "Guess who just parked outside?" Mark looked up, curious. "Dell Curry. And he's asking specifically for you." Mark's heart accelerated as he walked to the showroom. Dell, wearing jeans and a polo shirt, practically the same outfit from that first meeting, smiled when he saw him. "Mr. Curry, what a pleasant surprise! How's the Porsche?" "A marvel," replied Dell with genuine enthusiasm. "So good that I decided I need another present for myself." Mark blinked, surprised. "Another car?" "Yes, my wife got a bit jealous," explained Dell with a laugh. "And when Steph showed her the catalog of that Aston Martin DB12 that you have, she couldn't stop talking about it." "It would be my pleasure to help you again," said Mark sincerely. "As it happens, we have the model on display today. Would you like to see it?" As they walked through the showroom, Mark noticed that other salespeople were watching with interest. The story of Mark's humiliation and his subsequent redemption with the Currys had become almost legendary at the dealership. "You know, Mr. Reynolds," commented Dell as they examined the elegant Aston Martin, "I could have gone to any dealership in San Francisco for this second car." "I know that," agreed Mark, "and I'm honored that you came back." "I came back because I believe people deserve recognition when they do the right thing, especially when it's difficult." Dell studied him carefully. "Richard called me last week, said you've been working with the young man, sharing knowledge, treating all customers with respect, that you've changed." Mark felt an unexpected wave of emotion. "I'm trying. Every day." "That's what matters in the end," said Dell softly. "The constant effort to be better today than you were yesterday." That afternoon, as they finalized the contract for the second luxury vehicle, Mark reflected on the extraordinary path he had traveled in just 1 month. The arrogant salesman, who had once judged Dell Curry exclusively by his appearance, had been forced to confront not just a professional error, but a fundamental character flaw. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still moments when Mark caught himself making instant judgments. But now, at least, he recognized these impulses and consciously challenged them. As Dell had said, what mattered was the constant effort. When Dell drove away in his new Aston Martin and Mark returned to the office, he found an envelope on his desk with Richard's elegant handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "Officially off probation. Humility suits you. R." Mark smiled, putting the note in the drawer. Through the glass walls of his office, he could see the movement of the dealership. salespeople talking with customers, the shine of luxury vehicles, the constant coming and going of all types of people. He saw Jenkins welcoming a young couple who seemed slightly intimidated by the sophisticated environment. The world of luxury cars continued turning with its tempting commissions and dazzling status. But Mark Reynolds now saw it through different lenses. Lenses that allowed him to see beyond appearances, beyond stereotypes, to the true essence of what it meant to genuinely connect with other human beings. And that, he finally realized, was the most valuable lesson he could have learned. One that no car, however luxurious, could ever buy.